speaker is from Biocon, Mr. Sethu Madhavan.
Yeah,
Sethu?
hi, every good morning, good afternoon to all of you.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Are you calling in from India or are you from Biocon Malaysia?
I'm calling from my Biocon Malaysia.
From Johor.
Johor, yeah.
That's nice. How are things there?
So far so good. Everything is in control, pretty much in control.
Very good.
But there are a few cases coming up and down, 21 cases, but pretty much in control. Nothing to worry so far.
Yes. Good to know everything is well and safe there.
Yeah.
So in the interest of time, I will jump into I will allow you to jump right into your presentation. And your case study today is to avoid downtime and improve throughput. MES is at the core of digital manufacturing.
Yeah. So can you project my slides? Do you have this thing? Do you have my slides I sent you?
Paul?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Can you all see your slide? Yep. All right.
Yeah. So one of the things that I also wanted to connect was how is MES can be used and how artificial intelligence can be used not only to do a quick a scale up to a commercialization, and what is the assumptions to experience. So going on to the next slide. So at a molecule level, how does the can you go to the next slide? Yeah. So a progression of the molecule, if you were to see this transition from the way the way the biopharma companies navigate, so it all the way goes typically from engineering to clinical batches and the performance PPQ batches. So now what happens is when we go through this journey, the innovator and the biosimilar companies take different routes of approaches, because the innovator who's doing it for the first time does a more, it doesn't set so much of stringent specification, unlike the biosimilar ones who's going with the most stringent specification. So what's happened is in the case of the innovator is his brain power is distributed across all the three, both engineering batches, clinical batches, and the performance qualification batches. And if there is some variability that is coming in the scale down model, then it is actually distributed, and there is some redundancy which is built inherently, which takes care of the vagaries in the process. The next slide, please. Okay. So and therefore, if you were to see this, if you were to see the transition, the way the innovator does, the slide number 5 of it, is that? Can you go to the slide number 5, Paul? Yeah. So if you see the way the innovator does it, the innovator does not set out the stringent specifications. So he has a proof of concept based on the scientific advice we get to the agencies. We have those in-process tests. And as we go along, you identify the CPPs earlier upfront somewhere in the clinical batches itself. And then there's a PV batches with the controls already in place. And that's how the evolution of the innovators happens. So you have a certain set of control that is already built in, because by the time you do the clinical batches, you have quite a few set of parameters that are already there. Hello. And therefore, it's important, to in that sense to. So it's important that you have those quality attributes built right upfront, and then as the evolution of the process happens, you also have those controls which is built during the PV, and you're able to execute it spot on. Whereas the next slide, in the biosimilar case, what we typically do is the variability of the quality attributes becomes more pronounced, and because of the availability of process characterization data, the CPP controls, and the relaxation of certain manual operations. So can you go to the next slide, Paul? Next slide, the biosimilar space. Yeah, okay, yeah, the biosimilar, correct. The previous one at least. So in the case of the biosimilar, what you do is you have those stringent specification controls already built in, and because of which there are quite a few challenges. By the time you go to process performance qualification, you do simultaneously the identification of CPPs happens almost concurrently during these PVs at least, or the PPQs. Unlike the innovator where the controls are there in more clinical batches. The clinical batches is the control, and therefore during the PPQ, the innovator just confirms the control strategy. But not typically in the biosimilar, it's slightly more challenging and difficult. The next slide. Okay, so now why is this variability reversed? One is, okay, of course, the process steps, you have those quality targets, you have to understand the retention capability for every process, you take scientific advice, which results in, kind of tweaks around it. And therefore you got to go with the accommodating the regulatory rigor that is coming at the very last stage, and also the capacity improvement. How do you sustain the commercial demand? Now, what I wanted to explain you was, and if you all remember the Atari game, which is very quite famous in the artificial intelligence space. So how do you use big data and AI? And that is what I wanted to go. Can you go to the next slide? It's okay. So what is the use of artificial intelligence? Of course, AI, as many of you will be knowing, it's a simulation of human intelligence. So as you do, if you do it for the first time, you will have certain challenges, but you do something very repeatedly, and then you build the intelligence into the machine at least. So it is concerned with building the smart machines capable of performing consistently the same task that a human intelligence can do. So it helps essentially industry manage the terabytes of data which is generated during the bioprocessing. And it extracts concept and relationship. There are a lot of interrelationship that can come out using data analytics and see if this is the data that is trained. Then you can put a sequence, large A, have machine learning, deep learning, and have them incorporated at least. So what this has also done is, with the availability of wireless technology, miniaturization, computational fluid dynamics, many things are fueling this development of more sophisticated AI tools. Next slide. And you see the market is propelling in a very big direction. From 21 billion in 2018, it is expected to grow to a very significant one. Now, if you see this is a very interesting game. If you see the first time, I wanted to narrate you with a very simple game, which you will be familiar. This is a bat and a ball. For people in India, where cricket is a religion, you can see it. The first one, when you play the first game, you find that the ball is missing the bricks multiple times, the left-hand side. And as you go into the next sequence, you can find the middle one, where the automated game is going. If you see the 100th game, if you go to the right side, also you're finding it that the bricks, of course, there's far more consistency. And if you go to the 250th game, you see the level of maturity that is coming, and the number of bricks the ball hits is far more significant. So this is what, and therefore what happens is, so if you were to look at this kind of a progression, by the time you reach the 250th game, the AI has figured out to play the ball optimally above the brick stack, and that is where the importance comes. So now, having done this, next slide. Okay, now having done this, what is the application? Next slide. I think yes. So having done this, of course, where all we are trying to see, how can we use downtime or increase productivity? Now, with all these available, you use data, digital transformation, you have computers, you have data analytics. How collaboration across this will enable us to transform the manufacturing paradigm? If you were to look at, one is, of course, the engineering science, the manufacturing science, the QA, and the management side of things. What we're essentially trying to focus is my process robust, is how can I reduce my maintenance? How can I get predictive maintenance? If, for example, you have an equipment or a bioreactor or a lyophilization, will we be able to predict when the next failure is going to happen, maybe by ways of leak rates or whatever it is? So it will be important to trend this data and see how we will be able to predict and have more structured preventive maintenance program. One is from the engineering side. And as I said, from a manufacturing side, how will you have this kind of process quality attribute CPPs identified? So unlike the innovator and the biosimilar, when the review of the data is happening on a concurrent basis, the R&D generates the data, they hand over it to the technology transfer division, and they also go further to the manufacturing. So when you keep looking at this data and when you keep playing the game the way I showed in the previous slide, how do you incorporate the learnings, because you might not have the overall visibility of the manufacturing right upfront. You will still have some variability which is kicking in. So the artificial intelligence has also to be is a real tool that can be used, but how do we use it? There are some paradigm shifts that are happening, and also there are some challenges. Can I go to the next slide? Yeah. So if you were to look at the overall artificial across the biopharma, starting from the research and discovery, clinical development, manufacturing and supply chain, I think that is where we want to go, especially in manufacturing. You have multiple downtime because it could be of equipment breakdown, the supply chain, the inventory management, and the demand could be a little more dynamic and end-to-end visibility. And therefore, we want to use, as I showed you, the promise of artificial intelligence, and not only adding process robustness to the process, but it can also be used to have predictive maintenance. You can also do process modeling, saying that, look, this is where the process is moving in this direction, and how do I get those data trends mapped together, a little more statistical analysis, which will enable me to predict how the process is going to behave, and how is it that, which direction should I be taking to add robustness to my process. Next. Now, I'll just show narrative with an example. If you go to the big data, how is it that I do? If you were to look at a typical process here, so if you say you have a PI historian there, typically is required to continuously mine the data that you're getting online from a bioreactor, and then which is then analyzed and implemented to manufacture a golden batch. Now, the golden batch is typically you want to get maximum output, the same output as my previous speaker said, right first time. You need to have the same thing on dot. So if you were to do this kind of a system, of course, then the limitation will be the number of batches. As I showed you in my artificial intelligence game, the Atari game, you take almost 250 games to reach that level of maturity, or maybe 50 games. How are you going to do this? Because if 250 batches are required, it's going to be almost a life cycle. I mean, you will not be doing so many batches. The commercial life cycle itself will not even last that long. So hence the AI logic, the artificial logic should be coded to adopt the learning from other available data. So while we try to do the machine learning, we also have to be available to synergistic things that is going to come from the other areas of learning. So I think that is where it's a constant. We can't just say, okay, this is only one tool, but you need to have multiple tools which is coming in to give the information at real time, which will enable you to unlock the process and get the maximum that you need, because your throughputs and because being more cost competitive. Of course, the biosimilar industry is also going through that journey of being more cost competitive. And that is where robustness, more throughput, all is a significant benchmark of the industry. Next. Next slide. Now, if you were, I just want to explain you through the big data, through how we are applying this to, suppose you assume the next slide. I think I'm just saying how the next slide. I mean, this is an example yeah, exactly. So say for example, if you take this one, assuming the process parametric data and the quality attributes, this is an example of a simple one. If you say you have a bioreactor, you have a feed tank, you have a Raman spectrometer, you have a SCADA, and you have a PLC, and one is the CPPs and the CQA. So assuming the process parametric data and the quality attributes of a bioreactor are mined and linked to SCADA, which you can see in my diagram, the SCADA then feeds the data into the PLC, and in turn it's an automated sequence which is going to be triggered to feed to the bioreactor, and then the pump gets actuated. Assuming that you have a certain program logic and automation sequence which is already validated, which is approved by regulatory for a product, and in the commercial data, as you go in the commercial journey, and you gather the data, and you find that the optima is kind of changing. When you started the validation, you had a certain optima, and the journey you had a different optima, because the design space will also kind of getting more challenged. So there is a shift that is also happening. How do you reconcile, considering the AI is constantly also learning? So this is an important. In this scenario, what are the range of process parameters that a commercial drug should be filing for? So when you go for a regulated dossier, you have a PAR and a NOR. How will you be filing it? Do we have a wide range? Do we have this? So these are the paradoxes that we also need to consider while doing. And that is why if you see the automated win the 250th game, Do we take so many times to win the game, or do we have something else? So should these studies or simulation be just confined to only qualified scaled down models? You definitely have a scaled down model, and then you will be, and should it be across molecules, and how should at scale implementation should be an adoption of an optima that is formed from the scaled down model. If you have the scaled down model, should we use, because you will have multiple molecules, can you leverage the scaled down models from others into this? Is something that are that we need to seriously look at. And there are a few pertinent questions that require attention, of course, and certain notional boundaries that are to be defined by collaboration between the drug manufacturers and the regulatory bodies. Because before we go into this journey, because the journey is going to be the journey will start today, but as you go in the product life cycle, you will find that there are quite a few challenges that come your way. So these are some of the paradoxes that we need to live with. While what is the validity of the regulatory approval for a proven acceptable range? While the NOR is there, while you operate, the AI is operating at the NOR, but of course the validity is also there for a proven acceptable range. The next slide, of course, these are some of the factors which are driving the AA across the bioprocess pharma chain. You find that there are increasing levels of attention, and the data generation is increasing in volume, of course, exponentially, and it's getting more and more powerful than ever. And computing costs have decreased substantially, and availability of channel handling digital technologies is also improved. So I think clearly we have found that the use of AI is really it's gathering a lot of momentum, and but the data prediction and the data analytics has already reached a certain level of maturity. I think the next level will be more on machine learning and artificial intelligence, and you can see how is it being used to augment the next slide. How is it being used to augment reality in manufacturing? You can see those snippets, predictive maintenance. That is what I was trying to say. How the downtime is definitely being used as a tool to ensure that we are able to track these more efficiently and increase throughput. Of course, decrease in downtime means an increase in throughput. So, and some of those things have augmented intelligent bags execution, line clearance and changeover. You also find the augmented procedures, predictive response, and also immersive training and event logging. So all these are happening at a much more faster pace and enable us to get this thing in. So what is the reality it looks like? If you find the next slide, if you want, what is going to be the augment? Several steps before we go into the digital factor. Of course, I heard some of the challenges in the digitization, but whether the journey is big, and I think it's gathering a lot of momentum now. So you have to map first, and that's this thing, because otherwise, if you don't do a good job, then you will run into multiple challenges. Have a piloting, define capabilities, and then look at data analytics and transform this into digital factories. I think so. This is where the journey is going. And that's how I find the overall MES, a lot of multiple MES is going to be playing a very important role in this journey at least. So I think with this, I'm almost coming to the end of my presentation and happy to answer a few questions.
All right, thank you, Sethu. I haven't got any questions from the floor, but I will have some. I have one question for you. I know you're in a rush. So I noticed that you were using examples of big data, AI, and things like that. At Biocon, are you exploring the use of a digital twin?
Yes.
For your plants.
We are looking at multiple digitization techniques. First, we're trying to look at the quality system, and then we're also looking at, we have kept a very aggressive intent in converting many of our manual into our digitization. And if there is something that we can look at, we can mutually talk that over after the call.
Right. Excellent. Well, I understand you have a hard stop at 12:30, and it's already 12:30. So yeah. I will sensitive time for you. Thank you for your presentation. And I believe the audience wishes to get in touch with you. They can via the event app.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right.
Bye.
Take care. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.